Clock seems to not be moved. Good evening. This evening is our monthly meeting of the Board of Adjustment. We are committed to a transparent process and encouragement of public comment during our meetings. We will be accepting testimony from all parties. If you wish to testify on any particular petition before us this evening using the Zoom platform, please use the raise hand feature. You can raise your hand and we will recognize you at the appropriate time for the presentation of evidence for each case. If in person this evening, please hand staff your speaker's card. Planner Robin Keefe will be moderating the hybrid meeting and will be asked to provide names of those individuals that wish to speak. I'd like to call to the meeting of the City of Wildwood's Board of Adjustment to order. The board members present today are Bob Morris, board member, David Bertolino, alternate member, Arnie Sprunger, board member, Kevin Lux, board member, and myself, Jared Frank, chair. The Department of Planning staff present is Joe Vunich, Director of Planning, and Robin Keefe, Planner. Assistant Attorney Mac Miner and Court Reporter Courtney Tallman are also present with Ms. Tallman on Zoom. First, I offer into the record the affidavit of publication pertaining to today's meeting, November 21st, 2024, and take official notice of the zoning ordinance of the City of Wildwood, including Chapter 400, Article 2, authorizing and establishing the Board of Adjustment's powers and duties. Now, let me explain the hearing procedure. Please be aware the information that I am about to describe is also provided in the Board of Adjustments public hearing procedure handout, which was available online prior and up to tonight's meeting. This hearing is informal in its nature. However, the meeting's proceedings will be recorded by a reporter for future transcription if needed. The petitions are called in the order listed on the agenda. As the petition is called, I will ask the Department of Planning staff member to read each request into the record. Thereafter, the Department of Planning will have opening remarks and a brief slide presentation. Then the petitioner or his or her representative will be asked to state their name and address, be sworn in by the court reporter, make a brief presentation to the board explaining the nature of the requested variance, and present such evidence and witness testimony that may evidence the practical difficulties or unnecessary hardship that warrant the variance. The board will only consider the unique character of the property to determine whether they warrant the granting of a variance. Board members may ask questions to clarify the facts of the petitioner's presentation. When the board is satisfied with the material presented by the petitioner, the chair will then ask if there is anyone present or online who would like to speak in favor or opposition to the requested variance. Each speaker will be asked to provide their name, address, be sworn in, and then provide their evidence and oral testimony. Procedurally, the petitioner may request a continuance at any time during the hearing prior to a call for the vote in order to bring in additional evidence or testimony. The board may also continue the proceedings. After the submission of testimony and evidence from all interested parties, the board will ask a staff person to provide the Department of Planning's report on this matter if requested by any member of the board, the petitioner, or any individual that is participating in person or online. Once all witnesses have been heard, the chair will call for a motion to grant or deny, with or without conditions, then the board will vote. At that time, the presentation of evidence relating to the petition is concluded and no further evidence will be permitted. The board may make a decision today. Four members of the board must vote in favor of the variance for it to be approved. If a variance is approved, the petitioner has 6 months to obtain the necessary permits or establish the use, or it will expire. If the board's decision is unfavorable, the petitioner has the right to appeal to the St. Louis County Circuit Court. This appeal must be done within 30 days of the decision. Ms. Keefe, are there any questions at this time?
Mr. Chair, I have no one online. Are there any questions in the audience at this time? Mr. Chair, I see no questions, but I do want to take a moment to introduce Rick Brown, our Director of Public Works, and also the city's floodplain administrator who is with us from city staff as well. Thank
Mr.
you.
Brown? Hearing no questions at this time, the meeting will proceed. Will the department please read the request into the record, which will be followed by a brief slide presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the board, first case and only case tonight is BA 26-24, Dan Laughlin, 3425 Remington Heights Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038, care of Chris Keister, TWM Incorporated, 4940 Old Collinsville Road, Swansea, Illinois, 62226. Requests an exception to the specific yard requirements and exceptions for the purpose of constructing a new 2-story riding stable with dwelling that will be located on the second floor of it. On the property situated at 3320 Witsit Fork Road, locator number 26V 510179, Carter's Corner subdivision, Lot 2A, thereby authorizing the placement of it within the defined 100-year floodplain boundary and therefore a minimum setback distance of 0 feet in lieu of 50 feet required from it. A second component of this application is an interpretation of what constitutes a private stable per the city definition of same and the corresponding 100-foot setback distance associated with it. These requests are contrary to the requirements of chapter 415.030 definitions, chapter 415.070 FP floodplain district regulations, and chapter 415.090 NU non-urban resident district regulations of the city of Wildwood zoning ordinance. This particular property is located in Ward 6. And before Ms. Keefe begins her slide presentation, the department would like to introduce into the record regarding this particular case the following item: the city's charter and master plan, the municipal code of the city of Wildwood, specifically chapter 400, article 2, the Board of Adjustment, and chapter 415, the zoning ordinance. The department would also like to introduce the file that's been prepared and maintained by it regarding this particular request and all contents contained therein, including the department's report or recommendation. And then finally, any testimony, exhibits, or other items that are offered at tonight's hearing as evidence relative to this case. Thank you, sir.
Right, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As noted, the request this evening pertains to a two-story riding stable with a dwelling on the second story, which is proposed to be constructed within the defined 100-year floodplain boundary. The subject property is located on the south side of Witsit's Fork Road, just west of Highway 109. It is 12.67 acres in size, and it's primarily vacant except for several outbuildings that were illegally constructed by a previous owner. The immediate surrounding area is utilized for single-family dwellings and equine uses. The property does include a portion of it that's on the northern side of Witsit's Fork Road. This portion is heavily wooded and steep in slope. You can see that behind here. The property is zoned non-urban residence district and also floodplain non-urban residence district. The floodway and associated floodplain of Carr Creek defines the irregular southern boundary of this lot. This lot, when platted, had an area of it that was flood-free based on FEMA maps from 2015, the last adoption date. New flood maps are soon to be adopted and now indicate that the lot is almost entirely encumbered by floodplain. Flood events of the Merrimack River in 2015 and 2017 did flood this property, and flash flooding has also intermittently occurred here as well. The petitioner wishes to build a barn dominium on the property, which is characterized by a private stable on the first floor with a dwelling on the second floor. A portion of this building would be within the 100-year floodplain and therefore at a 0-foot setback from the setback required from it. A second component of this request is the definition of a private stable, which reads, a detached building accessory to a residential use, for the keeping of horses owned by the occupants of the premises and which shall not be used for any commercial purpose, including the boarding, hire, sale, or training of horses. Private stable, per the city's definition of such, does require a 100-foot setback distance from any property line. Part of this variance request is interpreting that definition and determining whether or not the residential use is primary in this instance. If the residential use were primary, it would follow the non-urban setback requirements, which would be a 50-foot front yard setback and 30 feet from the other property lines. This is a closer view of their site plan. And here we can see both the preliminary base floodplain or 100-year defined boundary. And then this would be the effective one. And this is the 500-year floodplain. This is the proposed structure to be constructed. And here you can see elevations of this proposed structure that show you an apartment on the second floor and the stables on the first floor, or along with those elevations. The applicant has provided sample barn and riding stable structures with their application for you to look at to give an idea of what their proposal would look like. And these are pictures of the subject lot. This is looking southwest upon it. And here you can see the rocked access drive into the lot. This is looking north across Whitsett's Fork Road at that northern portion of the lot. This is looking west on Whitsett's Fork. And this is looking east on it. Here we are looking at the southeastern portion of the subject lot. This is a closer view of some of those small outbuildings that are located upon it. This is looking west across the subject lot. And then this is looking southwest upon it. And finally, this is just another view looking southwest from the gate into the property. The city has received 3 written comments in support of this request. We've also received 1 other comment with comments on the design of the request, which was included in an earlier email to you. That concludes my presentation at this time. If board members have any questions for the department, Director Vunich, Director Brown, and myself are available to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keith. ahead.
Just a point of clarification. When you were talking about the definition of a private stable, I thought I heard you say that it's a detached building from the residence.
Yes, it says a detached building accessory to a residential use.
So how does this square up with that?
So in this case, I think you're trying to determine which use is primary within the structure. Is it this riding stable or is it the residential use on the second floor? And that will largely determine whether this definition is applicable.
Oh, so if the primary use is residential, then it's okay.
Then we would treat the setbacks, then we would apply the setbacks that would pertain to a residential use in a non-urban zoning district.
And the whole private stable thing isn't part of the consideration then?
Mr. Spronger, I would define this particular proposal as being in the gray area.
Okay.
It could be a private stable. It could be a single-family dwelling. And since they are both the same structure, the department is seeking your help in terms of an interpretation. The department believes it to be more a dwelling than a stable. And certainly if the more restrictive setback is applied, it creates, I think, greater issues relative to the floodplain and just the impact on the area. So the department could probably make this interpretation, but I think it's more appropriate for the board to consider it, given it's kind of in between.
Because it's a single structure.
Exactly, sir.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions for the department? Good. Not yet. All righty. At this time, will the petitioner please come forward, state his or her name, address, relation to the property? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Burley.
just a quick question. Joe, do we know how many days the petitioner tends to occupy that property? How many days a year?
I'm sure when the petitioner approaches and provides the presentation or his representative, but in the initial conversation with Mr. Laughlin, they were talking about actually having maybe a caretaker there on a more
Full-time.
permanent basis.
Thank you.
At this time, will the petitioner please come forward, state his or her name, address, relation to the property, and then be sworn in by the court reporter?
Evening.
Welcome back. State your name, address, and relation to the property, and then we'll get you sworn in.
Yes, Chris Keister, TWM Engineering, 4940 Old Collinsville Road, Swansea, Illinois, 62226. We are the engineer for Mr. Laughlin.
Get you sworn in here.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Keister, if you could please explain the nature of the request, the hardship, practical difficulty necessitating the variance as it relates to the character of the property only, please.
Yes, I think the Department of Planning did a really good job of summarizing everything that's being proposed, but Mr. Laughlin would like to use this lot for keeping horses, and at the same time, as the department noted, having a residence within the same building. Due to the economics of being able to combine those two spaces, he has proposed a two-story structure. Department and has referred to it as a barn dominium. And the reason being is that in order to have utilities, be able to permit this lot, there needs to be a residence. And then also wanting to have the stable on the lower floor of the building. As we're all aware, this site has been subject to some review throughout the year. And the big issue is previously has been the floodplain. So as the department noted, there's the effective floodplain limits. There's also the preliminary floodplain limits, which will take jurisdiction at some point in the future. Those preliminary floodplain limits encompass a large portion of the property. So in order to work better with those limits, Mr. Laughlin has proposed this structure being 2 stories so that there's less square footage being located within the floodplain. One other thing to note, so in the cross sections that was shown earlier, the finished floor of the structure will be 2 feet above the finished floor of the building will be 2 feet above the floodplain elevation. However, that will be for the horses, for any equipment, and then the residence will be anywhere from 10 to 11 feet above the floodplain. So it will be sufficiently protected in the event of a 100-year flood. As the department also touched on the setback issue, we've felt that pushing this building further east obviously pushes it further into the floodplain. While I don't want to make a a direct comparison between the previous application and this one. One of the things that was brought up at the time was moving the building closer to what's it for, getting it further to the edge of the floodplain, and also trying to minimize the development that happens within the floodplain. We feel that this northwest corner of the lot is the place to do that, where that risk is minimized. And as shown in these sections, the building and the residents are both being elevated sufficiently to protect against the risk of flooding in the event of a 100-year flood. If there are any other questions, be happy to answer them.
Hey, Mr. Keister? Mr. Springer?
I think the other concern was just how it might affect other neighbors. But I think what I'm hearing from you and the city is that because the square footage is less, you've shifted the location of the building. You just about minimized what you can do in terms of impact to surrounding properties. Is that correct?
That has been our attempt. One other thing I should have mentioned. So during the summer, there had also been discussion about what's shown on the south side of the building right now. There's a crook in the floodplain that extends onto the property to the west. That's a drainage way that takes most of this neighborhood. This site has been moved so that that drainage way is unencroached on. The letter B in the section that's shown there is about the end of any grading. So that drainage way is left free, open in its current state. And that's another effort to better work with the existing terrain and preserve some of the floodplain's characteristics.
And I have just one last final question. Just like a week or 2 or 3 ago, we had a pretty big rain. Did it flood there?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay, well, maybe we'll get an answer to that from another person.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait. You can answer that question when you come up to testify, assuming that you do that. Thank you. Thank you,
Mr.
Chris.
Springer stepped into that one. I think it's worth noting, if my memory serves me correctly, the neighbor to the left there in the white, that's Mr. Miller, who has written that he fully supports it as well. That would be the closest neighbor affected by the side yard setback. It's important to note. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Keister, for the presentation. At this time, any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may, Member Bertolino asked a question relative to the occupancy of the dwelling. And I mentioned Mr. Laughlin, if he wouldn't mind coming up and being sworn in, he could answer that question so we get it on the record officially.
Mr. Laughlin? If you could please state your name, address, relation to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Dan.
I can't hear.
Speaking to the mic.
Dan Laughlin, 3425 Remington Heights Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. I have this property under contract with the current property owner, purchase on approval of Wildwood for what we decide to try to do here.
Get you sworn in, Mr. Laughlin.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Laughlin, floor is yours.
Yeah, so the apartment will be occupied, or the residence will be occupied 24/7, 365. The intent is there will be someone there all the time. Well, not the intent, there will be someone there all the time. With the last flood that went through there, I went in there and saw some pictures and where that water flows behind Mr. Miller's. It was about 25 foot, 30 foot wide going through there after the 8 inches of rain, and it didn't get to the edge of where we're grading right now to do the drop off and whatnot. And it kind of flowed straight through to where the existing gravel is, and then it went towards the northeast corner, which is the lower area, which is typical. So there was no water infiltrating in front of his house, but it was all well behind his, and none of it really turned and went towards the front.
No. Any other questions for Mr. Lockman?
Thank you.
Here, thank you. At this time, is there any other members in the audience or online that would like to speak in favor or opposition to this request?
Mr. Chair, I have a speaker card from Eric Teagarden. Would like to speak on this request this evening. Thank you.
Either Mr. Teagarden, if you could please state your name, address, relationship to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Sure. Eric Teagarden, 3340 Whitsets Fork Road. I live a couple houses to the west of this property.
Just sworn in here.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right.
Start.
And I submitted a written comment as well, but I'd just like to say that I'm in support of this. I think this proposal has done a good job in comparison to the previous proposal on this property of trying to do, or to me looks like they're trying to do everything that they can to avoid the concerns that I had brought up on the previous couple of go rounds about impact to the floodplain. I see that, there's still a little bit with respect to the effective one, but I think it's done as much as it could, short of, I guess, building on the north side as I brought up on the previous proposal. But I can see where keeping horses, that's probably not a great plan there amongst the other concerns. So, I think this is done as a good a job as it reasonably can at trying to mitigate the impact of the floodplain. So I'm in support of it.
Any questions for Mr. Teagarden?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Keefe, any other speaker cards?
Mr. Chair, my next speaker card is from Jessica Egler.
Ms. Egler, if you could please state your name, address, relationship to this property, and then we'll get you sworn in.
Hi, Jessica Igler. I live at 3340 Whitsets Fork Road. I live with Eric. We are adjacent neighbors to this property along the creek when it takes that sort of long L shape there.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I'd like to say that this plan looks much more reasonable than the previous plan.
Mic a little bit more, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Is
Thank
that
you.
better? Yeah. I'd like to say that this plan looks much more reasonable than the previous plan. And I'd also like to note that there are a number of barns which I believe may pre-exist the incorporation of Wildwood in our neighborhood, which are about within that 100-foot setback from the property line. So even if this was considered to be a private stable, I think that it is in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. We've got, I think one of them is about 30 feet away from a property line. So I have no concerns about that or the setback. I did have one question, and I was wondering if there is that area on the kind of northeast corner of the lot that tends to gather water and flood. And I was wondering if that was going to be, I had heard something about potentially having a detention pond there. So I was wondering if that's still part of this plan or not. And yeah, that's pretty much what I've got. Oh, I also was wondering where the septic field would be placed, but I see that now, so I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaker cards, Ms. Keefe?
Yes, Yes, Mr. Chair, my next speaker card is from Mark Bromeyer.
Mr. Bromeyer, if you could please state your name, address, relationship to this property, and we'll get you sworn in.
Mark Bromeyer, 3348 Witsits Fork Road, about 4 properties to the west.
Get you sworn in here.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please proceed, Mr. Bromeyer.
I appreciate that Mr. Laughlin has been upfront with his neighbors about his plans for the property. And he has incorporated many of the features that were proposed to the previous owner during the Board of Adjustment meetings this past summer. I have no problem with the barn dominium being built at the 50-foot setback versus the 100-foot typically required for stables. I'm also comfortable with reducing the building setback to 0 from the 50-foot. But I have a couple of related items. Does the 20-foot setback from the west property line to the septic area comply with Wildwood's requirement? I know that's it's marked on there as a DNR minimum, but I just want to make sure it meets Wildwood's requirements. And does the setback, the 0-foot setback from the floodplain also apply to the septic area? If not, and the 50-foot is required, the septic area may need to be located near the northwest corner of the building between the road easement and the 50-foot building setback. On the site, also on the site plan, looking at it, should the base floodplain elevation in the building footprint be noted as 446.5 to match the sections? I believe there's a typo there. I still have concerns about the proposed construction's effect during the flash flooding. I'm wondering how much fill is being imported into the floodplain. And I would suggest consideration be given to include a detention area equal to or greater than the amount of fill being imported into the floodplain. I realize the engineer's calculations indicate 0 rise, but physically providing for it would be more reassuring to me. I was wondering if they could consider removing the trees that were planted along the west and east property lines, especially during the summer of 2024, which are in the path of the primary flash floodway. At least, a certain amount of them to reduce the damming effect, I guess. I'd also wonder if any I realize it's been pulled up out of the floodplain area, but I'm wondering if they could angle the slope graded area at the west end of the dry lot to help guide flash flood water into the main channel if it got that high, and possibly consider reducing the projection of the dry lot into the flash floodway from maybe 40 feet proposed to 30 or 25 feet, and make use of the triangular area to the right or the east of the barn as a dry lot. And finally, consider removing all or some of the raised gravel driveway and culvert pipe that was added by a previous owner, which is basically in the flash floodway path. That's all I have. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Bromeyer? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, my next speaker's card is from Kevin Gleason.
Mr.
Kevin
Gleason,
Gleason, 3465 Witsets Fork Road.
probably a half mile west of the proposal property. I'm also a trustee for the Woodsets Fork Road Maintenance Agreement.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to provide in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please go.
Kind of reiterating some of what was said, I'm very much in favor of it. They've displayed the values of community that we live in, and it's a great community. Working with the neighbors, working through what concerns are, what prior concerns were raised, specifically the floodwater or flash flooding. Mr. Miller couldn't make it. He's in California. I've spoke to him. He's a good friend also, and wished he could be here, but he's very comfortable in working with Mr. Laughlin on that. He has probably the biggest impact of that flash water coming through, as we saw in videos before, in ensuring that that turns and isn't an issue. So very much in favor. The residence versus stable, I'm not well versed on, but to me, I think you have to have a residence to have a stable. So to me, if it's a combined building, the primary has to be a residence, because you couldn't have a stable without it being this. So I don't know, just kind of looking at it very, very simply, but from my view, that's required before you can have a stable. So I would think it's a residence. That's all. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Gleason.
Mr. Chair, my next speaker's card is from Jeff Grass.
Hi, Jeff Grass, 3458 Woodsets Fork Road.
Get you sworn in here.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Mr. Grass.
Thank you. A lot of history on this site. We've all had last quite a few months here. So I'll keep it short. Like a lot of the residents have addressed, this applicant has addressed many concerns that we all had as neighbors. This applicant has been very open to all of us, has shared, what he's proposing. We've talked to him quite a bit. He's listened. I think the engineer has done a good job of accommodating the concerns that has been expressed with the prior applicant. And like Kevin just said, it just makes sense for this property, the way they're proposing this barn dominium. So definitely all in favor. I'm also the president of the Road Association. Have heard many comments from the previous applicants and went through that process. And this has been drastically different in a good way. So definitely all in favor. And I wish you guys would consider approving that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grass. Any questions for Mr. Grass?
Mr. Chair, my next speaker's card is from Bob Beisch.
Say your name, address, and we'll get you sworn in.
It's Bob Beisch, 3477 Woodsett Fork Road, 63038.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Mr. Beisch.
So I've been the past president of the Valley for 9 years, I think. Someone had to do it, but anyway, we've had family property for over 50 years in that valley. I own quite a few acres there, and I'm kind of reiterating, but it's important to me. It's important to everybody to hear that Dan's been very transparent with the neighbors. He's sent everything out. He's been open to discussion with everything that's been going on, that his plan is. I really, truly like the plan. It makes sense to me. And I just think it's the way it's been presented. I think it's been very strong. I'm very much going along with this. And I think on top of this, if you'd seen Dan's property, ever since I've known him and seen the house be built and so forth, he keeps it so maintained. It's a beautiful piece of property. And I'm sure what you saw, the pictures there, the property down here in the valley would be the same. So I feel strongly about it. And any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Any other speaker cards, Ms. Keefe?
Mr. Chair, I believe that brings me to an end of the speaker cards. Thank you.
Would anybody like to hear an oral presentation of the department's report? Seeing none. Any other final comments from the Department of Planning, and then specifically, Director Vunich? I think there was a few questions about septic tanks and setbacks and that. Anything that you wanted to address within your remarks?
Mr. Chair, I did my best to try to track the questions and write them down, so I'll kind of go through them as I heard them, and I apologize if I missed one or two. Certainly, we can discuss this further after I conclude. First of all, there was the question regarding the northeast corner of the property. And as the board members may recall, when we were discussing the other petition with Mr. Johns, the department did require that positive drainage exist across the entirety of the lot, which would include the northeast corner. In condition C of the recommendation report, I believe that covers that positive drainage. And certainly we know it's a critical issue to the residents, and we'll address it with the engineer as well as the future property owner if successful. In terms of the septic system, the department uses a general standard of the building setbacks for septic systems, which in this case would be 30 feet. It's not a requirement of the NU non-urban resident district, nor the floodplain component of the non-urban resident district. It is something that comes out of the grading code, and the grading code is administered by our Director of Public Works. And the Director of Public Works has flexibility in terms of placement. I think the key issue with the septic system is ensuring that it is not in the floodplain per both state and county and city regulations. And I think in this particular instance, the location is relatively reasonable. If there are some adjustments that can be made as we move through the more precise engineering, if the board grants the variance, we'll do our best to increase that distance as best as possible. And no, the septic system does not adhere to the same 100-foot setback as a private stable. We'll ask the engineer of record to correct the typo. And certainly there is to be fill placed on this site, which is part of the Department of Public Works and Department of Planning's recommendation for no rise certification. I believe, based upon a quick analysis of the cross sections that were provided as part of the packet of information for this particular case, it ranges anywhere from grade to a maximum, I believe, of about 5 feet. Again, the fill is added to the site, but again, the area of development of the site is substantially less than the previous petition. So I think, again, we're doing our best to address the structure of building in the floodplain through the no rise certification, and then also recognizing the residents had grave concerns about the other proposal, getting the location of the new building structure in a place that's suitable. So again, will compensating detention be provided elsewhere? I would have to defer to our Department of Public Works and probably defer to them at the point where we have a true set of engineered drawings that take us through the entirety of the proposal. The culvert pipe and gravel, all of those items were added by previous owners. And certainly when the Department of Planning reviews the submittal, if again the board grants the variance, we'll do our best to address those, meaning that culverts are usually sized based upon flow. And again, in this particular instance, the city did not authorize the culvert pipe nor any of the gravel in association with it. So I'm sure we can address some of that, maybe all of it. I'm not sure. Again, it's all premised on what's submitted and ultimately meets the requirements of city code. And then finally, tree removal. Certainly, I think that's more of a neighbor issue, not a board issue. And so the individual that spoke to that wants to talk to the property owner, if again, successful. I'm sure there can be some something worked out between the parties, not necessarily the city and the owner of property.
Correct.
Relative to the questions, I tried to cover all of them. Again, I may have missed one or two, but I think in the end, through the efforts of our Department of Public Works, and I'd like to thank the director of the department, Mr. Brown, for his assistance. The department is recommending approval of this particular proposal. If you're not familiar with Whitsett Fork Road in the valley, it is very much an equine equestrian area. And I think the petitioner has struck a nice balance. And so in both instances, relative to the floodplain and its setback and the interpretation of a lesser setback relative to private stables, the location is the best and only location on the site. And therefore, we are recommending approval of the series of variances. If there are any questions regarding the department's report and recommendation, as Ms. Keefe mentioned, Mr. Brown, Ms. Keefe, and I are available to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bunich. Mr. Sprunger, do you have a question?
Yeah, just, Joe, in your recommendation, you do have 3 items that would be contingent upon approval if we were to do that. Would we also need to, for the record, state that we consider the use of the structure as a primary residence, or do we not need to do that for setback purposes?
If there is a favorable motion made and seconded, I would ask that the board make as part of that motion the 3 items that have been identified by our Department of Public Works. And yes, if you would not mind, I think adding that the dwelling is considered the primary structure relative to the building, and that is what will determine setback distances. Thank you.
Further clarification on that, if I could, I have a little bit of concern about setting a precedent that all barn dominiums would be treated similarly. So would this be an individual exception, or would this be considered precedent going forward for all barn dominiums?
It's a very good question, Member Lux, but first and foremost, since I've been here almost the entire time there's been a city, I think this is the first barndominium we've dealt with. So I don't expect a lot more, but maybe we will. I think in this particular instance, the floodplain is the driver of all of the discussion. And the fact that when the plat was approved, Carter Corners, the existing defined 100-year floodplain line was not as great an extent on the lot, and there was a buildable area. Now, the new floodplain maps are finally being published for comment, indicate that almost all the site is in floodplain. So I think if you take the FEMA firm maps, you take the barndominium itself as a unique structure, and then just all of the things we're doing to make it work, I think it is something you'll see very, not much, if any more, or very seldom. And I don't think they'll be too concerned for the future.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the department? Seeing, excuse me. Seeing none, this time we will close the proceeding for a vote. Do I have a motion to approve, a motion to deny, or a motion to approve with conditions?
I can take a stab at a motion. All right,
Mr.
so
Lux.
I will make a motion to approve on the condition that we find that the property does qualify as a private stable and meets the residence requirements, subject to the following 3 conditions being met. The first is to comply with the applicable FEMA agency determinations for development in the floodplain. The second is for compliance with all City of Wildwood floodplain regulations, including getting a no-rise certification letter. And the third would be to comply with the direction of the city's floodplain administrator, which also happens to be the Director of Public Works, regarding all city codes and regulations, which at a minimum would include the completion of the FDP and the letter of map revision, along with an elevation certificate.
We have a second for that well thought out and thorough motion by Mr. Lux.
I'll second.
Second to that motion. So we have a motion to approve with the conditions as stated. Mr. Morris, how do you vote?
Approve.
Mr. Bertolino? Mr. Sprunger?
Approve.
Mr. Lux?
Approve.
And I approve as well. Congratulations. The variance is approved as stated. At this time, we have two additional items on tonight's agenda. Is that correct, Mr. Director Vunich?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, Ms. Keefe has been efficient and provided you a set of draft minutes from the October 17th meeting. And her and I would respectfully request a motion and second to approve. If there are any changes, certainly we'll be glad to make them.
Do we have to?
Chair at that time for last meetings.
Oh, is this a continuation? I think is what he's asking.
Just need a motion to approve the minutes as presented unless there's change.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sprunger.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Mr. Morris, how do you approve? Mr. Bertolino? Mr. Sprunger?
Approve.
Mr. Lux?
Approve.
I approve as well. Minutes are approved from last meetings, and then if the bylaws.
Yes, the elusive bylaws. we do talked about for 30 almost are before you tonight. Couple of housekeeping things. First, obviously you received them yesterday, and the department, particularly the director, extends its apologies. We're a little short-handed and we have a lot of balls in the air as we close out 2024. So we did the best we could. Also, the items that are identified in the red font, those were added by the department after the city attorney's review. I did receive an email late this afternoon endorsing those changes. And with the absence of Mr. Young, our normal city attorney, with no asparagine, Mr. Monk, the department would like to offer the opportunity to review the bylaws over the next month. And at our December meeting, we'll be able to discuss them as much as you would like. And then if acceptable, we would ask for a motion to approve and adopt. So tonight, we're offering them to you for review. If there are any specific questions that have come out of this the time you've had them, we'll be glad to try to answer them. But I think we could benefit from the next 4 weeks in looking at the bylaw. Thank you.
I think Mr. Lux would appreciate that. Another chance to review a little bit more in depth.
Does it make sense at all to, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I did read through them. And there were a few items that I was curious about. Should we wait on that, or should we just talk at least at a high level on some of these things? What would you recommend, Joe?
Well, my guess is it might be Article 6, which are appeals of administrative zoning musicians to the board.
That is an amazingly good observation. That's certainly one of them. Yeah.
Well, the department had the same concern that it is a function of the board, but it's a function the board very, very seldom considers. So there was a conversation between Mr. Young and myself about actually eliminating them from this set of bylaws and creating a second set for the purposes of that specific and limited review. He made an argument that I thought was effective to retain them. And that's part of the reason I'm saying maybe we wait so he can do a much better explanation of why it's
Okay.
there and why it's essential to the bylaws that are being presented for consideration.
Okay.
So yes, article still spot on that too.
Yeah, I had a hard time. At first I thought this must be a mistake. Because this doesn't, I'm not familiar with this at all. Also, I notice in Article 2, Section 2, and I just have a few of these, I'll quick run through. It looks like we're striking the terms of the members. Because my copy has a line drawn through them. Is there a reason why we would do that?
Yes, so kind of roll back in time almost 30 years. And when the initial board was established and appointed by the city council, the language related to staggered terms. So two of the members had a 1-year term, two of the members had a 3-year term, and one member had a 5-year term. We're not in that position anymore. Appointments are made at the end of your terms as appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. So to have staggered terms, it's really not applicable. You all serve 5 years once you're appointed. So it's a carryover from almost 30 years ago. And again, Mr. Young reviewed that and said it was suitable to be removed.
So typically I would have expected it to state a 5-year term rather than be silent on it, but maybe that's a
Yeah, it would
off
seem-
the record discussion that we could have. I guess my next question would be, is this something we need to discuss as a group on the record, or is this something that should be done off the record and then come on when we're ready to approve?
Yes, I would recommend that the discussions on how the drafted language looks should be discussed off the record, just for, obviously obvious purposes.
Yeah. So
I'm with you, Mr. Lux.
Let's go ahead and get off the record, but we can keep chatting would be the way.
Okay. It just seemed a little odd that you wouldn't have a term, but anyway. Like in Section 5, it says the board shall elect their own chair.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get off the record and then we can keep talking about it.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
So we do that first. Okay, I'm with you. Sorry.
No, no worries. Any other business prior to adjourning, Department?
No, sir,
Yes,
Mr.
okay.
Chair.
At this
Thank you.
time, can we have a motion to adjourn?
Sure.
Seconded?
I'll second.
That's all we need, correct? All right, this meeting is adjourned.
All right.
So in terms of your